All right, here we are. A Master said to say hi. Well, hello to A Master. Where is Tony? He's somewhere else. He's hiding. Oh, it has been very, very warm here today. I'll tell you what. It's been unseasonably warm for this time of year in Sydney. It was 30 Celsius today. Which is not particularly normal for this time of year. Usually in sort of mid-September, we'll start getting into the sort of mid-20s consistently. But today was a bit spicy outside. Not my favorite kind of weather. I'm sort of I'm a 28 guy. I love a good bit of I love a good 28. Australia is a federal parliamentary constitutional monarchy. Okay. Well done. Yeah, it was a bit spicy outside today. I went out for a walk. I made it quick. I just had I don't know. Today's been one of those days where I wanted to get a whole bunch of stuff. I've been saying this a lot lately, to be fair. I want to get a bunch of stuff done, and I just ended up kind of getting bogged down with stuff. And so Zach went to work this morning at 11:45 till 3:30, and so I wanted to go for a walk. And by the time I really had, after dropping him off and getting back, and I had to do some shopping, and then by the time I got back and could go to do my walk, it was 2:30, and so I had to leave at 3:15 to go pick him up, and I didn't get out of the house till 2:45. So my walk was sort of half of what it normally was. So I'm now in the hot sun. It's 29 degrees outside, and I'm absolutely humping it on this walk to try and get as much done as I can get done in as short a period of time as I can. So yeah, it was a bit rough. Oh, here we go. So PayPal, something I ordered, some subscription must have renewed on PayPal, because now I'm going to get about 5 million notifications on my watch. They send, so my PayPal app sends me a notification, Facebook Messenger sends me a notification, I get an email notification, and then I get an email from the whoever the hell I had my subscription paid for. So there's 4 notifications. My bloody wrist is vibrating. Facebook Messenger. So predominantly that's how I communicate with family and stuff back home. And I was just literally, as I started, there's another notification. I was just chatting with a younger, so one of my cousins. She's young. She's in her sort of mid-20s. Really, really super smart young girl. She's I sent her a note to wish her well on Messenger the other day. Or yesterday, actually, not the other day. Because she's starting her PhD. And she's doing a PhD in neuroscience. So she's pretty smart. And she's one of those people. She's one of those younger people who you can kind of be inspired by. Not because she says stuff or anything, but because she's ridiculously committed and focused and has an immense energy and motivation she's she went to high school, or she did after year 6. Her mom put her in French immersion, and so she went to high school, year 7 and on, in French immersion, which is 50% French, 50% English. She didn't really know much French. And by the end of high school, she finished high school, highest marks in her class, completely fluent in French. So she's my cousin's daughter. So, and my cousin married a Persian, so an Iranian, but a Persian man, and his family are very, very well educated, and so they wanted her to learn French as well as English, and then when she was in high school, she was at the mall one day, and this lady came up to her and said, she was with my cousin, and this lady came up to her and said to her, you are incredibly beautiful, and not in a strange way, but like very classical beauty. And this woman said, I run a modeling agency, and I'd love it if you would come and let us take some photos and stuff of you. So when she was in, I think, her last year of high school, she did a whole bunch of modeling work. Incredible. Like, she's very, very pretty young woman. And then she went to university and gave it all up because she didn't have time. And she finished university with the top mark in her year at University of Toronto. And again, like, my cousin, her husband, their sort of Middle Eastern Persian background, they're very protective of their children, but more so the daughters. And so when it came time for her to look at doing her master's, she was offered a scholarship at one of the best schools in Canada, for what she was doing for her particular science field. But it was in Hamilton, which is about an hour and a bit away from Toronto. So it was very, very traumatic. It was very traumatic for her father to watch his baby girl move away. And she went and did exceptionally well in her master's. And the challenging part was obviously COVID hit in the second year of her 2-year master's program. And so she had to do it. She had to finish it in those conditions. And then she got a scholarship offer for her PhD to do neuroscience at the University of Toronto, which is arguably, that and McGill are probably the two best universities in Canada. She's she's a lovely young woman, really, really, really nice, and puts her in, and she's an incredible athlete as well. She was nationally ranked in CrossFit. She won a provincial Tough Mudder competition at one stage. She's unbelievable. She puts her mind to things, and the determination's impressive. So I sent her a note the other day, or yesterday, and said, hey, that's awesome. You're doing your PhD. Exceptionally proud of you and what you're achieving, because it's amazing. And she's come back to me today, and she was saying, obviously, thank you, but she's like, I've kind of been second guessing my decision to do this. So it's sort of like, why? Right? Doesn't make sense. And she was saying that basically, academia is so far left wing politically that she actually finds it really uncomfortable. So she said she went to a workshop about 3 or 4 weeks ago, because as a PhD student and on scholarship, she has to do teaching assistant. So she's a TA as well. And so that school pays them, but yeah, they work with undergrads, and they're teaching assistants. So they hold tutorials and stuff like that for undergraduate programs. And they do marking and stuff like that. So she's a TA. And she said at the workshop, on the form that they had to fill in for registration, she said that it asked for her pronouns. And she's like, I don't really care for that kind of stuff. It doesn't interest me. She said, so I left it blank. And somebody said to her, oh, well, no, you have to complete that. And she said, no, I don't. And they're like, well, no, everybody else is doing it. She says, well, that's fine. I'm not particularly interested. Call me whatever you want. I don't care. And she said it was really uncomfortable. And she said she's had a couple of experiences like that already, where people she's run into and people she's had to deal with in academia at the school are so political that she said it's actually a distraction. She's just there. She wants to do her PhD. She has to run her tutorials. She'll do her research. She'll write her PhD, and she'll do what she has to do. And she said, but these people are just incessant. They're just nonstop with their politics. And she just said, I'm second guessing it. She said, I'm non-confrontational, but I'm just not interested in their politics. I don't care what they believe. They can believe whatever they want. I don't care. I just want to kind of do what I'm here to do. And I just said to her, you can't let these people win. It's really that simple. Like, you have to stand up for yourself and just say, hey, you're free to believe whatever you want. And I'm free to believe whatever I want. And I'm also free not to talk about what I believe. So back off. I said you just have to stand your ground. Because if you don't, they will assume the worst, because that's the kind of people that they are. If you don't agree with them, you're a racist, you're homophobic, you're a bigot, you're whatever. And it's not even that you disagree with them. You just may not agree with them. And there's a difference there. Or you may not care. It's okay not to care. Like, on all these political issues and stuff, it's perfectly acceptable not to have an opinion. You're allowed that. And somehow the evangelical left, with where their political philosophy has become a religion, you're not allowed to be agnostic. If you're agnostic, you're a heathen. You're a non-believer. And, that's really difficult. And it's quite funny too, because she ticks all the boxes, right? She's a woman. she's she's mixed race. Um, she's got all of she's aspirational in nature. She works hard. She does all the things that these people proclaim to support, but because they can't use her as a tool, then they'll find a way to ostracize her. It's really quite bad. It's quite sad, actually. But I said to her, you're stronger than that. You're tougher than these people. Don't bow down to their pressure. Just ignore it. Just do your own thing. And I said to her, and you know what? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to use their own stupidity against them. If they're coming for you and they're harassing you and they're bothering you, just tell them. As a, quote unquote person of color, or whatever phrase you want to use, I find this really confronting. They'll stop because they're afraid, right? Because effectively what you've done, I said to her, is effectively what you've done is you've called them out. You don't even have to make a big deal of it, but you've put them in handcuffs. So you just get to focus on doing what you want. But one of the things that's interesting is she said there's this growing group in the academic circle, particularly at University of Toronto, where it's very left. It's become very left-wing. She said there's a growing group of academics who are more conservative in nature. Actually, that's not true. Conservative is the wrong word. She said they're more small L liberal. They're more classic liberal. They're more like me. It's probably a good way of describing it. And I guess by extension, her. Where we don't believe in equity, so to speak. We believe in, opportunity, and may the best person win. And if the best person happens to be a white dude named Steve, whose parents were absurdly middle class, then so be it. And if the winner is a young lady from China who's an orphan, again, so be it, right? And so she showed me some pictures of what they talked to them about at her workshops, and it's madness. It's just utter madness. But she said there's a group of people who don't believe in that stuff. They believe in true classical liberal beliefs where people are actually equal, right? There's no hierarchy of equality, right? There's no this person's race, gender, class was somehow discriminated against 50 years ago, so therefore they now need to have more equality today, because none of that stuff. So it's interesting. Need more colors. I don't know. Maybe I think what you're suggesting is that the white balance is out. Hold on, let me have a look. Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's too much. Let's have a white balance. How's that? It's a bit yellow. Let's No. Well, that's too bright. Let's try. Yeah, that is yellow. Let's try. Warzone without filters. Okay, maybe it needs more saturation. That's a bit oversaturated. Wait a second. Nope. Well, I think that's going to be the best we're going to get. Make it a little more bright. Nope. Nope. Hold on. Let's try this. Yikes. Okay. Nope. Yikes. Yikes. We've broken it. Hold on. Okay. That's a little bit better. That's a little bit dark. Wowzers. Well, we'll have to leave it at that. This camera's ass. Every time you use this camera, it's different. I definitely think we'll need to have a new one at some point in time. Anyway, it was interesting. Okay, so there you go. That's Pepsi. So those colors look okay to me. I'm actually just playing around with YouTube at the moment in the background because it says that their creator studio is offline, which is a pain in the ass. Oh well. So anyway, no, it was interesting to talk to her about it because you sort of you see the other side of this identitarian nonsense, that there are young people who just don't necessarily agree with it all and who just want to get on with doing their schoolwork, their study and their research, and they just want to have a normal existence. And they are almost persecuted by a religious movement that's desperate to save them when they don't want to be saved. So it's fascinating to me. What else is going on? I watched a really cool video today. There was this young girl during the pandemic. Her name's Nandi Bushell. She's 11. And she plays the drums. And she started creating these videos where she covered rock bands, and she did the drum solos for these rock bands, and she would challenge them to a drum off, and she challenged Dave Grohl to a drum off. And so Dave Grohl, if you're not familiar, Dave Grohl is from the Foo Fighters and was the drummer of Nirvana. And so Dave Grohl accepted the challenge, and they had a drum off, and it was all very good fun. And this young girl was incredible. Anyway, the Foo Fighters did a live show at the Forum in Los Angeles about 2.5 weeks ago. And to close out the set, they invited her. Dave Grohl invited her on stage, and she did she played out the drum part for Everlong, which is one of the best songs of the last, probably one of the best songs of the last 40 years. That is dead set one of the best songs that's ever been written in the last several decades. So it's a classic, and this young girl, just in front of thousands of people, just smashes it out. It's impressive. I look at her and I think, you know what, she's too young to have fear, which is cool, right? Because usually young kids develop that sort of fear of failure and everything when they become teenagers. And so she's not that old yet. And so she's able to just sit behind the drum kit on stage behind Dave Grohl and play one of the most iconic songs written in the last several decades in front of thousands of people. It's crazy. But also it sort of got me thinking about where I first started hearing back in the first time I ever heard any of the music that ultimately became the Foo Fighters was when Dave Grohl was still in Nirvana. So Kurt Cobain hadn't killed himself yet. And Pearl Jam, it was between, I think it was between 10 and Verses. They had, yeah, I think it was. And Pearl Jam did this radio show where they broadcast their own sort of bootleg radio show. And they played stuff from musicians that they liked, and they played some of their own stuff that hadn't been released yet. And so some of their set tapes and things like that, and some of their live performances and all this sort of thing. And, excuse me, Eddie Vedder said that he'd been sent this tape of a demo by Dave Grohl of some music that he was working on for himself, not for Nirvana. And it was some early tracks from the first which became the first Foo Fighters album. And it was incredible because Dave Grohl played all the instruments on these tracks. So he recorded them himself. He played the drums, he played the bass, he played the guitar, he did them all. He sung, wrote all the lyrics, did everything. He recorded the whole thing by himself. And yeah, I mean, it was just impressive. And then obviously Cobain shot himself. And that's when the Foo Fighters sort of appeared. But what was interesting was I remember the first time I saw the Foo Fighters, and the drummer was Trip Hawkins. He's still the drummer for Foo Fighters now. And the first time I'd seen that guy play the drums, here's a crazy one. So I can't even remember the year. I want to say 1993, maybe 1994. I can't remember the year specifically. But I was working security at a bar club in Ottawa called Zaphod's, and it was just Ottawa has this area where the universities, basically all the university students hang out, called the market area. And it's just a bunch of different nightclubs and bars and stuff. And they all played different types of music back in the 90s and 80s. They all had different types of music. So you had some that played what would become alternative music, and some that played like hard rock, metal. You had others that played like more, now I guess we'd call it dance music. Anyway, so Zaphod's played sort of this punk alternative style of music. And I was working there one night, and before we opened, and back then live music was big. So we had bands, like big bands, all the time coming through playing. Like everybody played in these places. I have a great Smashing Pumpkins story that I can tell. But anyway, so we were doing a live set. There was a live show that night. And it was kind of weird because it was the middle of the week. And most of the live shows happened on like Friday and Saturday when the students could turn up, because that's how most of the bands made their money, was merch and stuff off the side. So, but we were told by the manager that it was an open show, but it was for A&R people. And A&R people back then were the recording industry people who looked at talent and signed people to record contracts and stuff. And it was an AR show, or an A&R show. And it was kind of like, okay, like, who's it for? And they said Alanis Morissette. And now, if you're Canadian, Alanis was back then she didn't have a last name. She was just Alanis. And in the 80s, she was like this pop princess with big perm hair and spandex, and singing like syrupy stuff. And she was in it like a kids TV show on Canadian Broadcasting and all kinds, like, and we laughed. Like, me and one of my buddies were like, Alanis? Really? Same one? Yeah, that's her. And we just kind of chuckled and thought, oh, this is going to be a weird night. And so I remember being backstage, and she rolls up, and it's like, this young lady's undergone like a massive transformation. She still has long hair, but it's stringy, and she's wearing like jeans, and it's just somebody totally different. And I was like, she's undergone like a massive makeover here. And so kind of like, okay. And she gets up, and they bring the house lights on, and she rips into some of the songs from Jagged Little Pill. My God, I remember one of my roommates and I were there, and we were just sitting there like, holy shit, what is this? We were gobsmacked, because it was so out of character from what anybody who knew Alanis knew. So she was from the Ottawa area, right? She was from actually a very similar area to, what's her name? What's that other? what's her name? Crap. Avril Lavigne. Jesus, my brain went fuzzy. She's from a pretty similar area of where Avril Lavigne was from originally. And Celine Dion. Come on, dude. Get real. Celine Dion's from Las Vegas. And so she just rips into this set. It was crazy. And the one thing that stood out for me watching her perform was clearly there was more going on here than her acting. She actually kind of, you could tell she was like emotionally invested into this music. And like Blind Freddy could see that. And it was an impressive show. And we found out later that she had already been signed to a record deal, and that this was just sort of for the Canadian music reps to get a taste for what was to come. And man, like, she did well. But the thing that stood out the most was her band was really good. They were like exceptional musicians, because for all of Alanis's snarl and emotional investment in her songs and her singing, and she tried a few times to play the guitar, and it was a goddamn disaster. Like, I forget which song it was, but before she must have tuned this goddamn acoustic guitar for at least 10 minutes. It was like, look, I barely know how to play the guitar, but I'm tempted to take this away from you and tune it for you, because this is hurting everyone here. Just, you're only going to play like 3 chords tops, and you're only going to probably play like during the bridge, and then the rest of the time you're just going to not touch, just like stop, just sing the songs, right? But her band was really good. And the drummer in particular was phenomenal. Never seen anything quite like this guy live. The closest thing was the drummer from NoFX was pretty close to the same energy level, but nothing. This guy was technically brilliant as well. And it was Trip Hawkins, who then went on to play it with Foo Fighters. And so when he joined Dave Grohl in Foo Fighters, I remember saying to one of my roommates, he's probably the only dude in the world who's able to, Dave Grohl is able to look at and say, yeah, this dude's a better drummer than me. I'm just going to let him play drums in my band. It was pretty cool. So that was a pretty interesting experience. And the Smashing Pumpkins story is a good one. So one night we were working, and the Smashing Pumpkins were playing, and they were Siamese Dream had not yet hit the mainstream. So we knew who they were because we followed that kind of music. And so we kind of like, we knew who they were, right? But they had not yet hit the big time with Siamese Dream. Gish, I owned Gish, so I knew what their back catalog was, and knew who they were. And so they played at this club where I worked. And after the show, my roommate and I were working there, and we're just like, you guys can come hang out back at our house if you want. We'll get some pizza and whatever. There's beers or whatever at the house. Come hang out. And they pile back to our house. It was it was a bit of a long night. Um, yeah, it was a bit of a late one. Anyway, they had to get up very early in the morning because they had to drive to Montreal from Ottawa on their bus because they were rich. They were just kind of starting. And they had to go because they were doing a live acoustic set of a couple of songs for Musique Plus, which is the French Much Music. Like back then, it was like Canadian MTV, but in French. And so they had to go to Montreal and do a live set there. And they just crashed at our house. Anyway, wake up the next morning and it's probably 11 o'clock. And I stumble downstairs and Jimmy Chamberlain, who's the drummer from the Pumpkins, is basically passed out in a chair and there's nobody else around. And so I kind of like wake him up and I'm like, bro, where are your people? And so they were all gone. They'd woken up and left. And I'm not sure why they left him or whatever. They were probably all still a bit saucy from the night before. And they drove to Montreal and left him. And he hung out with us. They were live at 1 o'clock on Musique Plus. And he hung out at our house. And we turned on Musique Plus. And the Pumpkins were there doing their things. And I remember Billy Corgan saying, our drummer is unwell, so we're going to do this acoustic only. And of course, the bassist, Darcy Retzky, she couldn't play her instrument. Like, I don't mean to be disrespectful. She couldn't play the bass. She didn't know how. It was like, again, I knew how to hold a guitar. I knew where all the chords went. And Dad said I was probably as good a bassist as she was. And she was quite literally awful. Billy Corgan, I think, wrote a book or did an interview or something, and he said the same thing. So I'm not telling tales out of school here. She couldn't, when they started the band, she couldn't play her instrument. Didn't know how. And so she's there on TV doing these ones, picking at the bass, and dead set she's not touching the strings. And so James Ehaw, the lead guitarist, and Billy Corgan are on acoustic guitars, and they're having to carry it, and you can tell that they've tuned their guitar. Well, Corgan has tuned his guitar to have more of a bassy sound to make up for the fact that his bassist didn't know how to play the bass. It was crazy. And we're sitting there watching this, and I remember my roommate saying to Jimmy, what's his name? Jimmy Chamberlain. Like, are you going to get in trouble? He's like, I don't know. Our manager will probably yell at me or something, but it'll be sweet. We didn't get paid for this gig. And we're like, no, you didn't, but it's promotion and you're nobody. And anyway, because back then there were no mobile phones, right? There's no cell phones. And so anyway, he just basically, we dropped him off at the bus station in the center of Ottawa, in downtown Ottawa. And he took a bus to Montreal and met up with them there for a gig they were doing the next night. It was crazy. It was a pretty strange event. We had a few of those. Our house was a bit of a flop house for musicians at times, because most of those musicians back then in the early 90s, right? They didn't have money. Like, touring musicians don't have money. And so if you sort of say to them, hey man, do you want to come back to our place? We'll get some pizza and have a few beers or whatever, and free beers and pizza. Like, let's go, right? They're up for that, because otherwise they're just going to all pile into a shitty motel together and have to pay for their own beer and have to pay for their own pizza, and that's not a good scene. So yeah, we had a couple of years where it was a bit wild. But anyway, we met some interesting people during that time. And the craziest one I've ever seen. So back then, becoming a musician, right? A recording artist and a musician, there was a path. You played cover songs in shitty bars and pubs to anyone you could. You probably didn't get paid most times, or you got part of the door charge or the cover charge or whatever, right? So you were almost always having to spruik your own self to get people to come. And then you'd eventually start mixing in your original music. And then if you got lucky and the guys in your band or the girls in your band were smart enough, you'd save enough money to record an EP or a demo. And if you were super lucky, it would get picked up by some shitty college radio station. And then eventually maybe somebody'd hear it and maybe you'd get a record deal, and it would be speculative. And a speculative record deal was like, you wouldn't really get an advance, but you'd get early options on your royalties. Because people used to actually buy CDs and shit back then. And then, you know, that was the path, and you'd graduate from college radio to mainstream radio to Much Music in Canada or MTV in the US. And then that was it. You were top 40 and you were gone. You were successful, right? And so there was a plan, but the plan involved you playing live and you learning your trade and going and doing the grind. And pretty much every band in the late 80s, early 90s did exactly the same thing. They did the hustle, they did the grind. And I remember doing an A&R show. I was on holidays, summer holidays back in Toronto, and I was working at a bar there. One of the bigger ones in Toronto. I don't know if it's still around, Crazy Horse. I don't know if it's still there. It was kind of an institution. And we had an A&R show for Sony. And this band hops up on stage, and nobody's ever heard of these people. And not only has nobody ever heard of them, nobody even knows who the individuals are, which is pretty rare, right? Because normally the way that stuff used to work is the individual people in the bands were in other bands and they'd had a modicum of success, but the band for whatever reason didn't work. I don't know. The drummer got married and the bassist became an auto mechanic or some shit like that. It always falls apart, and there's always one or two dudes in the band who are like really motivated to be musicians, and they just drive it all and drive it forward, and then they bounce around and they form new bands and all this stuff, right? But nobody had ever heard of any of these guys. And they get up on stage and start playing. And Dead Set's the most fucking polished music I've ever heard from a live act. It was like listening to a CD, which is, if you like live music, it kind of is dirty when it's like that, because part of live music, particularly live sort of rock heavy music, is that there's an energy to it, and you actually feel the music hitting you, right? And it's not polished. It's got I don't know, I'm not a sound guy, but it's got a bit of grit to it. The sound has, and because of the room and everything, everything is just sounds different, and it's got energy. Nah, man, these guys were like, it was dead set like listening to a CD. It was perfect. And so in and of itself, that's impressive, right? You can kind of appreciate the level of craftsmanship it takes to produce a sound like that live. You're just like, far out, man. That's pretty intense. And so one of the dudes who was in the crowd, I remember him talking to us, and he's like, these guys have never played a live show. We're sitting there going, that's madness. And he's like, they're studio artists. They've been working together recording this album for a couple of years. They've all had jobs, and they paid for it, so the band was called Our Lady Peace, and they went on to become one of the biggest Canadian bands. They still might kick around. Dude, the lead singer was a dude named Rain Maida, and they became massive. And they got signed to Sony Canada, but then Sony in the US picked them up, and they had a modicum of success. Their second album was platinum in the US. They did pretty well. But yeah, these guys had never played live before this one show. I just literally couldn't believe it. And they played basically their whole first album. This album called Naveed. And it was crazy. I mean, it's a great album. It truly is. It's a spectacular album. But it was, yeah, it was a little bit different in terms of, so their second album was an album called Clumsy, and that one, if I'm not mistaken, went platinum or gold or something in Canada, and well, they were always platinum and gold in Canada, but I think it went platinum in the US as well. They had a song called Superman's Dead that went super popular. But yeah, and then it was funny because that next year I was working at a show on campus in Ottawa, so I was back at school that year, and I was working in one of the venues on campus, and they did a live show, and dead set it sounded exactly the same. They became a little more comfortable on stage, but the music was just dead set perfect. And you know what? That show, here's a crazy one. They had an opening band. Here's a good one. And it was this small little group that nobody's ever heard of. We were like, who are these people? We thought they were just some local kids or some shit like that. We'd not heard of them. And they were opening for Our Lady Peace on campus. So you can imagine you're touring with a Canadian band that's just kind of started to get popular, and you're the opening act for them. So you're making 2/5 of nothing, basically, right? And it was this small little band that you probably have heard of now, but back then, it's a little band called the Counting Crows. And they came on and opened for these guys. And I mean, that style of music is more to my taste. And they played a lot of From August and Everything After in that show. And they they finished with Mr. Jones, right, which is obviously still their biggest song. And they ran out of CDs. So when their set was over and they moved off to the side and were selling CDs, their road crew were running back to their bus and pulling out boxes of CDs. And they were running out of, they just ran out of CDs at this one show. And the it they were really good. And then it was fascinating. So we kind of knew who the Counting Crows were because we'd seen them, right? And then August and everything after started turning up in record stores. And those guys worked hard, man. They were touring constantly. We'd seen them 2 or 3 times that year. They'd come through Ottawa. They were traveling around the US and Canada all the time doing shows. And by the end of that year, when they'd come through, Mr. Jones had hit MTV, and they were doing well. But I remember when you'd go into record stores back in the day, and along one of the walls, they'd have the top 20 most popular, highest selling CDs that week, and they'd all be in order, right? 1 through 10, top to bottom, and then 11 through 20 on the next aisle and all that stuff. And you'd always see the Counting Crows at like 16, 17, and they were just kind of selling enough, just nibbling away. And then all of a sudden, boom, number 1. Hard working, man. Those dudes worked hard. They hustled. And then there was Our Lady Peace, who just created a really good, record off the rip. Managed to get some A&R people to buy into it because they looked good. They sounded good. They were brooding asshole rock stars without being completely hard to work with. They were like a professional version of a grunge band. It's a good way to describe them. And so they did well. They were everything the music industry loves. They were talented, clean-shaven versions of something that was a little bit rough around the edges, that was a little bit harder to control. These guys were the cleaned up, safe for public consumption version of that. So, in 1994 or whatever, you had Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots. You had all these, Alice in Chains and Mudhoney. And you had all these sort of bands that had broken out of the grunge era, Soundgarden. And they were kind of like giving the music industry the middle finger as they went through. And then you had these guys, these Our Lady Peace guys in Canada, who were like easy to manage. They sounded similar. They were talented. They worked hard. They were no problem. Like, that's a music executive's wet dream, right? Music industry, all the entertainment industry, think of it, right? The entertainment industry, it looks for inspiration and it finds inspiration, but something that's inspired is often hard to control because it's generally art, right? And so then what does the industry do? The industry then looks for controllable facsimiles. And that's movies, books, TV shows, actors, actresses, singers. It's all the same. Doesn't matter, right? They always look for something that they can effectively just manufacture cheaper and more controllable. It's because the music industry or the entertainment industry in general just needs to mass produce. But yeah, it was, those were interesting times. It's really sad now. There's no live music scene. Canada still has a little bit of one, but, there's really no live music scene anywhere in the world now. It's just been sort of superseded. I think about it and I think people who are growing up like my son's age and that, they've just kind of missed out. Like, even my wife and I'll say that too. Like, my son will not have the same university experience that we had, where we would kind of hang out on campus, go to a pub, hang out with our mates, have a party, hook up with someone. He won't have that, because that's just not, it's not just COVID, but it's just the culture of the culture of those institutions has changed. And of course, in Australia, such a large portion of the students now are foreign students who that's not their culture at all. They're just, go back to their room and study. That's their parents paying a lot of money for them to be here. So it'll be a much, much different university experience for Zach than what his mother and I had. It'll be fascinating to watch. But that's for next year. That's the whole university thing right now is a bit of a gong show, actually. Who knows what's happening? I don't think, I wouldn't say it out loud because somebody might hear me, but I wouldn't think it'd be the worst thing in the world if he had a year off. Let the dust settle. Go back a year later, but I don't know. I think his mother would basically, we'd need to tie her down. So, what else? Today's been a kind of a, I think I mentioned this earlier. I've been saying this a lot, but I haven't been getting as much done as I would like, but I'm still getting a fair bit done. So a couple weeks ago, I started to notice that I just wasn't as productive as I'd like. And so I started implementing, I hate the word hack, but productivity techniques. I like that word better than hacks because they're not hacks. They're just strategies. So I started implementing a few of those to try and get stuff done. So I have two that primarily I'm focusing on right now, which is my 2-day rule and my must-do rule. So at the beginning of a day, I write down one thing that I have to get done that day. And if I do nothing else that day, I have to do this thing. And inevitably you find when you do that, you almost always get that thing done. So it's a good strategy, right? Because you can do more, but as long as you get that one thing done, you at least feel a little bit productive. So I've been doing that. And that's how we ended up with the TikTok and the short getting published yesterday, because yesterday's task was I have to edit that and publish it. That was my one thing I had to get done yesterday. So I did that. But then I also have a 2-day rule. The 2-day rule is there are things that I know that I have to do regularly, and I have to build a habit around them so that I do them all the time. And for me, it's exercise. So I have to go out for a walk. And earlier in the year, I was really good about it. I was walking about 5K a day, probably 5 or 6 days a week. And then I got blisters, and I got really bad blisters. And I was off my feet for a whole month. And my routine kind of fell in the hole at that point. So that was kind of a nuisance. Anyway, last week I sort of decided I need to get that shit together again because fitness has been one of my goals for the year. And I'm kind of making progress, actually. So I'll finish on the 2-day rule, and then I'll come back to that. 2-day rule basically says, or anything like that, where I have to do it, I can't go 2 days without doing it. So, for example, yesterday I didn't go out for a walk. There's a whole bunch of reasons. The TikTok shorts edit video stuff, primarily among them. But I had some other things I had to do yesterday. So I did my one thing yesterday, and then that precluded me from having time to go do my walk. But because of the 2-day rule, I absolutely had to go for a walk today. So So that was good. So I've been doing that. So this basically, I think in the last week, out of the last 7 days, I think I've walked 5 of them, which is good. So I'm pretty happy with that. And overall, one of the things that I did, so I don't like weight loss as a goal. I think weight loss is a stupid goal. I mean, it's measurable, but it's not indicative of a process, right? And it's actually not even a great indicator of physical well-being. So I kind of went, that's a byproduct of everything else. So if I'm more active and I don't eat like a toddler, then I'll probably just lose weight anyway. So there's no point in focusing on that because it's hard to control. But there are some indicators of fitness and health that are actually better indicators. So probably the two that I focus on the most are VO2 max and heart rate variability. So VO2 max is it's the your ability to metabolize oxygen at your in an efficient way. And I decided I wanted to lift my VO2 max into the middle of average. So I wanted to go from low average to middle of average this year. So I'm kind of now approaching middle average, which is good. And next year, maybe I'll try for above average, which is good because that's a measurement of how well your lungs can metabolize oxygen into your bloodstream. So that's important, right? That's an actual sign of fitness. They make athletes do that test. So that's one. And then the other one is heart rate variability, which is basically your heart's ability to very quickly respond to changes or how efficiently it responds to changes. And again, that's a sign of heart fitness. So I'm trying to get that up and improve that significantly this year. And I've had pretty good progress on that one actually over the course of the year. So the thing is then when you start looking at fitness versus weight, which is completely different, over the course of this year, despite having periods of time where I've not been as active as I should be because of reasons, my overall fitness from January when I started measuring it to today is actually significantly improved. So that's really, so I'm happy, but I'm also annoyed that I could do more. So we get let out of lockdown, I think the 18th of October is what they're sort of talking about now. That's when there'll be sort of 70% double vax in the state. And then if you're vaccinated, then you'll get to kind of start getting back to normal. Get a haircut. That'll be awesome. But also the gyms are opening. And so I started saying to Harriet, I think I'm going to wait a month because I anticipate October will be like January. So if you ever sign up for a gym in January or you go to a gym in January, it's a gong show. Because everybody creates a New Year's resolution that says, I'm going to get fit this year. And they all go on January 2nd and sign up for a gym membership. And then from January 2nd to January 10th, the gym is bedlam. it's just chaos because these people are committed and then they're not committed about 2 weeks later. I wrote a newsletter about this one time I have a friend of mine who runs gyms. He runs Jets gyms. He owns a couple of franchises here in Sydney area. And man, some of the data around people in gym memberships, fantastic information. So basically, there's a couple of different types of people, right, who sign up for the gym. You have people who sign up and they think that by signing up to a subscription, they'll lose weight. They're not sure how, but they know that if the money comes out of their bank account or off their credit card for the membership, then somehow magically they will lose weight. I am being facetious, of course, but I've done that myself. I had a membership to a Virgin gym in the city, and I canceled it after about 3 or 4 months. And when they called me up and said, "Hey, why are you canceling?" I said, "Because you charged me every 2 weeks for my membership and I didn't lose any weight." And they're like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And they said, "But you didn't go." And I said, "Yeah, but I just assumed if I paid, I'd lose weight, right?" I was kidding. I was being facetious, but that's how a lot of people think. So that's problematic. But gyms are really interesting because so you have people like me who've signed up and then recognized a couple months in, this isn't happening, and cancel. And then you have people who sign up, use the gym regularly, and never quit. And then you have people who sign up, never use the gym, never stop paying. Generally speaking, most companies who run subscription services love those kind of customers. So why do you think, Jason? Why do you think that? If you know why, is it because they're lazy? But yeah, so that's why gyms, what they do, and it's really smart, right? So they're very, very good at understanding how engagement works. So when you sign up for a gym, the first thing they try and do is get you to go there all the time. So they're trying to get you to form a habit where you go to the gym, because it doesn't cost them anything for you to go there and push weights around and sit on a spin bike and use their showers. Like, it doesn't cost them anything, right? Their costs are more or less fixed, whether 100 people turn up or 10 people turn up. So if it's going on subscriptions, it ain't. I don't know, man. That I think people like me who have in the past bought gym memberships and don't use the gym, I don't think I spent any less on McDonald's. I think I could afford both. It's insufficient quantity as well, I would say. But yeah, so that's why gyms, when you first start, they try and get you in to do like personal training, and they try and get you into a program, and they try and get you to join the sessions and all that shit. Yeah. See, I wish it was a Macros subscription. If I could pay a monthly charge to get coffee and hash browns, at a discounted rate, that'd be awesome. Sign me up for that. But yeah, so because they know if they can get you going and make it part of your habit, you'll never stop, right? So that's one. That's the first group. The second group of people is the me group, where they need to try and get me uh, to quit as quickly as possible. And it sounds counterintuitive, but if they can jar me into a form of activity, then I shame myself, and then I maybe won't quit. So I become that group of people who have a subscription to the gym or a membership to the gym, and I'm too ashamed to cancel it. And I rationalize with myself that, oh, don't worry, I'll get to it next month. And so I just keep my subscription going. And so there's psychology there at play where it's like, it's almost confrontational with the customer. It's almost a confrontation from the perspective of, if they kind of shame me into going and I still don't go, then I'll be too ashamed to cancel. And so I won't cancel, and I'll eventually just get around to it. And so what gyms do is gyms never have, smart gyms never have re-engagement plans. So this was the mistake that Virgin made. And the woman who ran Virgin gyms in Australia actually said it, was that they had a program in place that if somebody hadn't been to their gym in 6 months, they'd call them and try and get them to be re-engaged. And all it did was get people to remember that they had a subscription or a membership to the gym, and they'd cancel. Very, very few people became re-engaged. So it was like a reminder that you had a membership that you weren't using, and most people at that point canceled. Whereas if you use Fitness First, man, those people never contact you. If you don't go, they'll just take your money. They don't care. Just keep paying, because it's free money for them. So why rock the boat? But at the beginning, when you first sign up, they're all on you, man. They're on you like white on rice. They want you there. They want you to know that they care about you, that they have plans to help you, and that you're the center of their universe. And then after about 2 or 3 weeks, it just dries up, because you're either committed or you're not at that point. And then if you're not, they don't want to rock the boat. It's quite a smart system. You'd also be surprised how well gyms track now. Gyms are very good at tracking your usage. It's a good skill for them to have. But yeah, I'll wait until sort of November, mid-November, and then I'll sign up for the gym, because we live like 50 meters from North Sydney Leagues Club, and they have an amazing fitness center. Like, it's incredible, right? It's all built for the football players. And so the fact that it's like I could literally stand out front of my house, throw a baseball, and hit it. So I actually considered doing Krav Maga as a way of getting fit. I have a friend of mine who he's Jewish, and he was in the Israeli army, and fit guy. And he said to me that he does Krav Maga once, twice a week, and that's it. That's fitness for him. That it's such a workout that he doesn't need to do anything else. It just keeps him lean, keeps him fit, keeps him strong, keeps him fast. And he's like, you should try. And then the place where I go in Crow's Nest to get my sleep apnea gear, so like filters or masks or whatever, right next door to it is a place that they do MMA training, but they also do Krav Maga. and I seriously considered going there, but I don't know. I always just think I'll get hurt now because I don't know. I used to not worry about getting hurt. I was physically pretty. I was physically pretty tough, but now that I've gotten older, I have to be honest. Hurting my back. I've hurt my back a couple times in the last few years. I first heard it. I actually first hurt my back. How old would Zach have been? I usually measure everything by how old Zach was. Probably been 6 or 7 years ago now. You want to be a cage fighter? Okay. I did boxing in high school. I boxed quite a lot actually. And he and I used to go swimming. And I was quite a good swimmer when I was a kid. Actually, I used to compete till I was about 15 or 16. And Zach was young ish. I guess he'd have been 12, 13. And so when you're that age, you just want to race and beat your dad and all that stuff. So we were at the pool one morning, and what we used to do is I used to wake him up at sort of 6:30, and he and I would go swimming for an hour or so, and that way he'd get back in time for school, and I'd just have a shower and go into the office, right? It was a good way to start the day. And this one morning, he's like, let's race. So we started racing, and I got to the end, and I went to do a flip turn at the wall, and I turned too early, and when and so my legs reached back, and I guess I thought the wall was there, and I pushed off. There was no wall, and I felt my back tweak. I just felt this little snap in my lower spine. And so by later that evening, I was a mess. I was in bad shape. And that was the first time I'd had any kind of back trouble. And that was probably a month and a half, just real discomfort. And then it kind of went away. And then about a year and a half, 2 years later, it was about 2 years later, Harriet and I were going away for the weekend. And so Harriet's mom flew in from Melbourne. And she was going to look after Zach for the weekend. Or as she likes to say, Zach was going to babysit her. And we went and did some grocery shopping. And when we came back, we put the groceries on the counter. And I had my hand on one of the bags. And Harriet put some other bags on the counter, and she pushed because there was not enough room. And the bag that I was holding dropped. And I don't know what happened, but it was heavy. It had like milk and stuff in it, and it dropped. And I felt it drop, and so I kind of snatched my hand up. And as it hit the length of, the bag and everything, and so it bottomed out, and it pulled, and I pulled up at the same time, and I felt my back go. And we were getting ready. We were probably 20 minutes away from leaving, and we were going up to the Hunter Valley. And I was like, shit, this isn't going to be good. And so we drove to the Hunter, and by the time I got out of the car, I was basically crippled. I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of the car. It was awful. And so the whole weekend we were up in the Hunter Valley. We were meant to play golf and do all kinds of stuff. I basically sat in the hot tub in our room, in the hot water, just in near agony, which Harriet didn't mind because she likes the hot tub and stuff too. So she's kind of just lounged around ordering room service and shit. So she was reasonably happy, but we did want to play golf and stuff. We just never got around to it. We managed to get to a couple of wineries and stuff that she wanted to go to and buy her some hooch she wanted. So she was okay, but it wasn't great. And then another time we went to Canberra. Not my back got better, and then we went to Canberra for the weekend. And Zach had been 14 or 15 at this point, and he and I were at the Science Museum or something, and there's a ski simulator, and you sort of stand on these two things with your feet, and you have poles you hold onto, and then your feet rock back and forth like you're going downhill. And I screwed my back up doing that. And then the drive home, I had to at one point pull over. I couldn't push the brake pedal anymore. I had to pull over on the freeway and get out of the car and stand up because I couldn't put any strength into my foot to push the brake pedal. That was bad. And so then probably the last time, catch you, Jason. Thanks for dropping by, buddy. And the last time was at Christmas. Just before Christmas in November, I hurt my back as well. And that was probably of all of them, that was the stupidest one. I think I've said it on stream before, but I wanted to learn to use my other hands. So I wanted to learn to use my right hand for my mouse and then use my left hand for WASD keys. And so I switched hands, and just something went wrong with my posture. And I ended up with sciatica I ended up with a shoulder impingement the first pass, and then my back went. And I then ended up with hamstring syndrome. And basically for 5 or 6 months, I was a mess. Up until probably May, just walking hurt. So I'm a little bit sensitive around the type of physical activity I do now. So that's why I kind of like contact sports as exercise sound good in theory, but I don't know if my back would hold up to it now. So we'll have to take a pass. Sorry, I'm just reading something. I'm just reading something I saw on Twitter. And, you know, I used to be an ardent believer in government funded journalism or broadcasting. So growing up in Canada, I thought that CBC was a good idea. It had a mandate to promote Canadian nationalism. And in Canada, that's really hard because of the French and English situation. And the CBC had a mandate to make that happen and did an okay job. And then when I moved to Australia, I liked the ABC because I thought the ABC was entertaining. They made good kids TV. They did reasonably good news coverage. Their election coverage is still exceptional. But now, in Canada, the CBC is effectively the propaganda unit of the Trudeau government. And I'm not being partisan or anything, because I don't really care. I don't have a dog in that fight. But they are, and they're even further left. They they promote and support him because they know he can win, whereas the further left can't win. But the national broadcaster shouldn't have that shouldn't be displaying that kind of bias on anything. And now in Australia, I see the same things bubbling within the ABC. And I think Australians are just less tolerant of it than Canadians are. I mean, there's a significant, and I'm an ardent supporter of this idea that the ABC should be defunded, that it should become a subscription service. And if you want to watch the ABC, or you want to listen to ABC radio, or whatever you want, then you should have to pay for it yourself. Like, Sky News is on Foxtel. I don't like Sky News. I think it's stupid. So I don't have Foxtel. Therefore, I don't pay for it. I'm not interested in it. I don't like it. I'm not paying for it. But the ABC is increasingly the opposite of Sky News in terms of its political philosophy. But I'm forced to pay for that. I don't want to. I don't like it. I don't read it. I try and avoid it. Yet I'm forced to pay for it. So I just kind of think that has to change. I think the ABC has to become a subscription service. I keep hearing from, people who are supporters of the ABC saying, oh, but it's not that much money. Okay, then you pay for it. You give me a refund. I don't care if it's only like $3 a year. I don't give a shit. I don't want to pay for it. You pay for it. Oh, well, but it would be unsustainable if everybody who was able to opt out. Just tells you that nobody places a value on it. You just told me it wasn't very expensive. Like, if I'm not prepared to pay $3 a year or $4 a year for the ABC, clearly it's not sustainable. Or it doesn't appeal to me. And if it appeals to you, then you should pay for it. I just don't think that's unreasonable. And the reason I feel that way is pretty simple. The ABC in many cases has ceased being news and has become entertainment. And part of the problem in society is that news has become entertainment. And so you now have a situation where you're calling it news and it's actually your entertainment, and you expect me to pay for your entertainment. Well, I don't want to. I shouldn't have to. And I bring that up because I'm just scrolling on Twitter on my second monitor, and I see something from SBS, and it's just basically shit. It's just political nonsense. And all I can think is why am I paying for this? Like, it's talking about, Julia Gillard's powerful anti-misogyny speech was one of the most defining moments of her leadership. It was bullshit. She called the leader of the opposition a misogynist. She had no factual basis for saying that. This is he was a decent human being with 3 daughters and a wife. His sister, there was no fundamental basis for her comment. There was no reason for her to resort to that level of name calling as Prime Minister in Parliament. To me, it was just a lack of class. I think she looked horrific. It's one of the reasons I nothing to do with, I don't care if she didn't like Tony Abbott. I don't give a shit. I don't think it's not my cup of tea either, but the Prime Minister of Australia shouldn't be carrying on like that. And now, more to the point, whatever it is, 10 years later or whatever, the government-funded SBS shouldn't be promoting it as strong leadership, blah, blah, blah. Julia Gillard was the most hated Prime Minister in the history of Australia. So this is just revisionist history. That woman was disliked intensely. She had the lowest support rating The lowest popular support rating ever recorded for a prime minister in this country. Ever. I don't know, man. You know, one of the mandates and one of the charters of SBS and the ABC is that they're meant to reflect Australian society. They don't really reflect how people feel about most things. They certainly, I mean, even their own independent inquiries suggest that their coverage of things like climate change don't represent the views of the majority of Australians. So, again, it begs the question is, well, why do I pay for this? Right? And what we need like some courageous leaders to stand up and ask that question. Why should the majority of Australians pay for this? So my view of the ABC and SBS, to a lesser extent, I suppose, is, you know, next year, after the election, the ABC at the next budget gets 1 year of government funding. And they get to keep all of their facilities. They get to keep all of their infrastructure. And then at the end of that year, they sink or swim on their own. The government stops writing them checks. They have a whole year to build up a war chest of money and to build up subscribers. And if they want to go full CNN, Washington Post level leftist crazy, good luck. I'm not paying for it. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Because then the people who are paying for it will be responsible for it, but I won't be. And so these journalists have just turned people like me who normally support, and their editors and their producers have turned people like me who normally support publicly funded broadcasting against the entire concept because it can't be trusted. It doesn't reflect anything. It reflects a minority held view on everything. Quite literally, they basically suck the hem of the garment of the Labour Party, and Labour Party polls less than 40% of the population. They're not even the most popular political party in the country. And so when the most people don't get represented, that's problematic. And it goes back to I started earlier on about my young cousin going to universities. The problem with these institutions, it doesn't matter if it's the media, it doesn't matter if it's education, bureaucracy, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't represent or reflect society at all. And these people talk about diversity, but they don't have any. They're the least diverse groups. Like, what was it at Harvard University in the United States? 98% of the professors at Harvard are Democrats. How does an institution like that reflect, quote unquote, reflect society? You can't. And Australia is the same. The universities in Australia would have similar numbers, right? The vast, overwhelming majority of academics and administrators at university would be Labour Party members, or even further left, probably some Greens in there too. But almost none of them would be Liberal or National Party members. Almost zero. Quite possibly zero in most cases. I would say at University of New South Wales or University of Sydney or Monash, or it would be close to zero. That would be openly members of either of those political parties. But the vast majority, 90+%, would be openly willing to tell you they're members of the Labour Party or that they support the Labour Party directly. And the administrators, their unions support the Labour Party. Like not tacitly, their unions actually give them money. Right? So the whole and the teachers union, right? So you get down into the public school system, The teachers union directly funds the Labor Party, right? So how are these people meant to be apolitical? Because that's actually their job. They're not meant to teach politics or have a political point of view. And we kind of tend to rely on teachers having ethics, although increasingly that's not happening either. We see it I'm in a Facebook group for my son's high school, and every so often you'll see a parent say, hey, my son or daughter came home today and said that the teacher said X. I don't care what their politics are, but they shouldn't be teaching it to our children. And you'll get some parents who will complain, say, "Oh, but that's a good idea." No, it's not. It's not about a good or a bad idea. It's a political point of view, and it shouldn't be taught to children in a public school. If children are not allowed to go to public school and pray because we have to separate, the church from the public school system, which is a good idea, then we also have to separate political philosophy from there as well. These are institutions of learning, not indoctrination. But yet the teachers union, are literally fund the Labor Party. How's that work? Right? All the bureaucrats. I mean, you see it all the time. The bureaucrats, they go from working in ministries and in departments, government departments, to they move back and forth between the Labor Party administration, and then eventually some of them even take seats in state and federal parliament. They're just bureaucrats. Makes you wonder, right? You sort of like, these institutions don't reflect the diversity, and that then they talk about diversity, and that kind of diversity talk makes me laugh, because it's not diverse at all. It's actually quite funny, because if you think about it, right, that form of identitarian politics associates people based on their race, gender, sexual preference, ethnicity, etc., with a particular point of view. So they make this wild assumption that these people all have the same perspective, which is crazy, right? Not all, so not all people have the same political points of view based on whatever their gender or their racial background or whatever, right? It's kind of crazy. And yet these people have a tendency to think they do. It's a ridiculous notion. And so the idea that you should be allowed, I'm happy for you. Good for you. The idea that, that they should have some kind of, diversity in their ranks is nuts. So I don't know. It's really weird. I have, yeah. Anyway, it's a strange thing, and the sooner it's. What are you talking? What are you? I don't know, man. We're just talking. So yeah, it's an unusual time in the world where people think in terms of diversity, but they forget that having a different opinion is okay. Diversity is a bingo card, but it's not about what you think. So that's we're in a very unusual spot in society right now. It's an odd time. I just need to quickly do something here. Hold on. Okay. Just need to check something. We're having there's a bit of a problem. There's a bit of a problem. Jesus. I'm having a where YouTube bit of a problem. Oh, far out. I had my speakers on. Jesus. I'm having a where YouTube bit of a problem. Oh, far out. I had my. Okay, I think that's better. YouTube are having this issue where the YouTube Creator Studio isn't working at the moment. So we're not seeing analytics and stuff of our stream. So the streams are all working, but the YouTube Creator Studio isn't functioning correctly. And I don't know why, but it doesn't seem to want to, even if you reset it and stuff, it's not coming up. Live streaming isn't available, it says. Yet here we are. Weird. Yeah. Better TTV is kind of available. Do you have the plugin, Tony? Do you have the extension? Do you have the Better TTV extension? So maybe I can test it. No, I can't actually. Yeah, I can't really test it right now. But I think the emotes, if you have the extension, I think the emotes now work. I think. But they haven't yet got approval from Google to allow people with channels to link their channel to their Better TTV account. And so, you know how on Better TTV you can have, like, with your channel, you can have certain emotes. That isn't working just yet. But yeah, it's coming. Apparently, they're just waiting for their approval process from Google to go through. Because yeah, it takes a little while, obviously. I think Google are obviously rightly pretty selective about the review process for people who, or companies or whatever, who want to be able to allow you to link your YouTube channel to their service. I think they want to know what that's for. But I think you knew it was a matter of time before the Better TTV emotes came to YouTube, when people like, Tina Taman and Dr. Lupo and that start moving over. And then there are others. I heard Ludwig say today on a podcast that he thinks there are other YouTubers who are going to be moving fairly soon other Twitch streamers, big ones, who will be moving pretty soon. Stream Elements is a bot, first of all, and the wrench is an indicator that it's a moderator. So the bot is a moderator in the channel. That's how it. That's why it has the blue wrench. Well, Stream Elements is a bot. Yes. I don't know. I don't know if you're carrying on a conversation with it or not, but fair play to you. If you are, if you put in bot commands, it'll actually reply. But there you go. I'm not sure what's going on with YouTube Creator Studio at the moment. It's kind of a pain in the ass. It's not working. They've been having troubles all day. I was in a Streamlabs Discord and people were talking about it not working correctly today. So I sort of assumed there'd be issues this evening. It should be, yeah. I think it's exclamation mark command or commands plural, maybe. I don't know off the top of my head. And it'll tell you the commands that are available in chat. One of the things that YouTube has to do absolutely unequivocally is, hold on a sec. That's crazy. Yeah, YouTube is definitely having problems. I don't usually get dropped frames, but YouTube's having a few little issues today. But one of the things they absolutely have to figure out is chat, their YouTube stream chat. It's just so bad. Like, it doesn't integrate with anything because every time you spark up a new stream, it's a new event. And so therefore chat has its own unique URL. And so you can't build a doc or anything for it. And then nothing integrates with it. So even though I can see within Streamlabs OBS, I can actually see chat now, which is better than straight OBS, which doesn't even have that right now. I can't do anything in chat because I can't sign in. So I have to have a separate browser open to sign into chat so that I can actually use chat. And because the YouTube Studio isn't working, or the Creator Studio is not working correctly at the moment, it's just a gong show. Moderation tools on YouTube for live streaming are pretty poor. That's probably the safest way to describe it, to be honest. It's an area that you'd love to see them improve on, but I'm not convinced they will. Yeah, it's just chalked. That's a nuisance. Okay. What else is going on in the world today? I think it's pretty interesting that now here in New South Wales, the state government is talking about 90% adult vaccination rates, like properly, it's not aspirational. They're actually talking about it as a thing. What's the date on that one? New South Wales. So yeah, by mid-November. So by the end of October, before the end of October, they're saying that they'll hit the 80% vaccination rate. And then before the middle of November, they'll hit 90. That's pretty crazy. Those are some pretty insane numbers. I think what they should do, and I've said this before, I think once we get to 90% vaccination of adults, so people over 16, let's just say, then I think what they should do, is they should set up a program for first term of the new school year, starting in late January, early February, where high schools, so 12 years old to 18-year-olds, they should roll out the vaccination program for those people. They should use the schools as the vaccination centers and just send the public health nurses that they're using now, just send those people to the schools and go vaccinate the kids. And just hit every public school, hit every Catholic, every public, every independent, every private, every high school in the state. Hit them twice between, February and June, and double vaccinate every single kid there. And then by, July 1st, before the end of this financial year, we'll have, 95% of the public vaccinated over the age of 12. And then we're kind of set at that point. Because schools, I don't care what anyone says, schools are the absolute best vaccination centers. Because the kids have to be there. We take attendance. We know where they are. They're easy to corral. We can do it by age. I mean, the classic example of that working. So you can even put measles and shit aside, right? Like, put all that aside. Probably the best one to use is cervical cancer. So in high schools in Australia, they introduced the HPV vaccine for boys and girls. I think about a decade ago. And already the rates of cervical cancer among young women have fallen significantly. So by vaccinating children pre-puberty, before they become sexually active, and vaccinating them for HPV, boys and girls, we stop the spread of that. And the knock-on effect is the whole reason why you want to stop HPV, because otherwise HPV it's an innocuous virus. It basically has pretty much no physical manifestation on men at all. And on women, the only manifestation is that it increases their rates of cervical cancer at a younger age. So we've effectively reduced that in a meaningful, measurable way. So we know this works because all the data tells us it does. And the thing is, I keep saying it, you can believe whatever you want, but math is undefeated, man. It's just that simple. Math is undefeated. So I was on Facebook the other day, and this dumbass, there's this woman talking about how in San Francisco, the high school kids are 90+% vaccinated, and they've had no outbreaks so far this year in any of the schools in San Francisco. And this dumbass comes into her post and says, "Oh, I don't believe that because Israel is 70% vaccinated and they're still having tons of cases." And you're just sitting there and you're saying, like, I just replied to him, do you not believe in herd immunity? Like, what is it? And so then I thought, okay, well, he's too stupid to understand it clearly, right? So let me break the math down for him. So I sat there and said, okay, imagine you have 10 kids, right? 9 of the 10 kids are vaccinated. 1 kid isn't. The 10th kid who isn't vaccinated gets the virus. Now, we know that on a per exposure basis, vaccinated people have an 80 to 90% lower chance on a per exposure basis of contracting the virus. We know that. That's just proven, and there's nobody who can refute that. That's just a fact. So if you have 9 people in a room with 1 person who's infected and they're there for 10 minutes, let's just call that an exposure. Well, if those 9 people are vaccinated, their chances of catching the virus from that exposure are 80 to 90% better than if they were unvaccinated. And we know that it's not 100%, the transmission rate is not 100%. So if you stay in a room with somebody and you're infected, you're not giving to everybody 100% of the time. It's not everybody gets it. So there's an per exposure control rate there, right? And we know that the vaccine is 80 to 90% better than that. So what we can infer is that the ref, the R naught, so the transmission rate of the virus, we know it's about 1.4-ish, maybe 1.5. Delta might be a little bit higher, etc. And what that means is every person who is infected infects 1.4 other people. And so what you end up with is exponential growth in infections. However, we'll go back to our 10 kids. If the infection rate and the ref are 1.4 in unvaccinated populations, well, it's 80 to 90% better in vaccinated populations. Let's just use 80%. We'll use the low end of the number. Well, in that situation, the ref goes from being 1.4 to being less than 1. It actually becomes something like 0.6, I think, is the actual calculated number or something. So what that means is that there's about a 60% chance that of those 9 children, one of them might become infected. Maybe. But there's a better than average chance that none of them will. And that's how herd immunity works, is that the herd has enough immunity that the infection points have diminished. And so the problem becomes that when you have partial vaccination, so imagine when you're Israel, right? And you have, effectively, Israel has about a 65% vaccination rate. Well, what that means is in a 3-person house, 2 people are vaccinated and 1's not. Now, if that unvaccinated person is infected, or even one of the vaccinated people are infected, well, if the vaccinated people are infected and they live in the house with these 2 other people, the person who's unvaccinated is getting it for sure. Right? We know that's conclusive. But if it's the other way around, there's a chance that the other 2 people who are vaccinated may not. But because of the proximity and the number of exposure points, their chances of being infected still go up, even though they have an 80 to 90% reduced risk of per exposure infection. When they live in a house with somebody who is infected, their number of exposures goes up at a much, much exponentially higher rate. So therefore, the chances of the vaccine not failing, but having a breakthrough are much higher. So if you go back and you say, well, we have 90% vaccination rate, then it's not like 1 person in a 3-person house is unvaccinated. It's 1 person in 3 families of 3 that's unvaccinated. So now you start to see how the per exposure basis diminishes, right? And it becomes, and so the virus dies out. And so that's how That's why having 90+% vaccination rates are so important for any disease, right? For any disease, that's why it's important. But this one in particular, because it's very contagious. And I explained this to this guy on Facebook, right? And he goes back to, oh, but Israel. It's like, are you stupid? Or are you just not paying attention? And then I realized this person is one of those idiots who runs around and says, schools should teach people how to do taxes or change a tire. No, bro. Schools should teach people how probability works. Schools would be, society would be infinitely better off if Muppets like you knew how to do probability. If you understood how odds worked, the world would be an infinitely better place. Infinitely. But you want people to learn how to change a tire. Guess what? My tire doesn't... If I need to have my tire changed, I could take it to the shop up the road and pay the guy $100 to not only a couple $100 to replace my tire and do the work, rotate them, balance them, give me my car back in 3 hours. That's easy. I can do that. I don't really save anything. I'm no better off knowing how to do it myself. But I am better off if I understand the probability. Right? If I understand that the probability that I'm going to have to replace my tires every few years is 100%. And if I haven't done it in 3 years, there's a better than average chance in the 4th year I'm going to have to do it. I'm actually much better off than knowing how to change the tire myself. Just knowing the probability that I will eventually have to replace them. I'm actually exceptionally better off. So all these idiots who talk about, schools should teach people how to do their taxes or change a tire or wash their clothes. The schools we would as a society and people would be better off if they explained how probability works to dummies like you and made you learn it, because you'd be able to do the math. And we'd stop having debates about science because, again, as I keep saying, math is undefeated. Once you run the numbers and everybody agrees the numbers, or the numbers are so easily verifiable that you can't refute them, then but the problem we have is we have irrefutable numbers but stupid people who can't calculate them correctly. It's the oh, Israel has 70% vaccination, but they have all these cases. Or all these people are vaccinated and they're all still getting the virus. Okay, let's take a trip down memory lane. I'm old enough to remember when cars, it wasn't required to do up your seatbelt. And then they made seatbelts mandatory. You had to wear a seatbelt. Buckle up. The day that they passed the law that said you have to wear your seatbelt, did we have less car accidents the next day? No. We didn't have less car accidents. What we had was less people going through their goddamn windshield at pace. That's what we had. So the measurement of success for something like that is fewer people dying in car accidents and fewer people being seriously injured in car accidents. Equating wearing a seatbelt, it's the same as a vaccine. Oh, well, people are getting the vaccine, they're still getting sick. They're not dying. They're not ending up in ICU or if they are, it's at much, 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 much lower rates. Right? So the probability, we're back to that old chestnut, the probability of being infected and dying while being vaccinated is infinitesimally smaller. So you're now arguing against odds, and you can't win that argument. You can't win it on fact. So then you can talk about the emotional aspect and you can have a value judgment, but now your argument is, well, I'm not that concerned about, the probability of death. It's a big call. I would prefer you not make those choices for me. Right? It's a pretty stupid position to argue. But, we live in a world of stupid people. So it's the way these things go sometimes. But I also think the other side of that argument is equally bad, right? Like that ass clown Patton, what's his name? Patton Oswald, whatever, Oswald Patton, I think, whatever his name is, Hollywood nobody, talking about people who don't get vaccinated shouldn't be allowed in ICU and shouldn't have nice things. He's just going on. It's like, are you slow? Or if somebody gets sick, you help them. You make them better. Because here's the thing. If they get sick with the virus, then they have a natural immunity to it afterward, and they're as well off as somebody who's vaccinated. They just got sick. How did they get sick? Okay, well, they didn't get vaccinated, but show some goddamn empathy for the human life, man. Like, you know what I mean? I always remember, I guess I'm now old enough to remember some things, but I remember when people were getting, in the 80s and stuff, and people were getting HIV and were getting sick. And you had this group of people who would say, oh, well, they're gay and they got AIDS because they're homosexual and that's their own choice. And so we shouldn't spend any money on trying to save their lives. That's awful. Who are you? Like, what's going through your head when you think like that? And a lot of people thought like that in the 80s. A lot of them. It's awful. Nobody chooses to get sick. You could make the argument that there are lots of people who engaged in sexual practices that they knew they shouldn't and ended up getting HIV. But it doesn't mean you should withhold medical service for them. Right? It's just such an awful... It's actually evil. I actually think they're evil. And that's the fundamental problem I have with the political left, is they ascend the moral high ground, but then act like horrific evil people when they get there. So somebody like Patton Oswalt, what's the dude's name? Is that his name, Patton Oswalt? Yeah, Patton Oswalt. Like, that dude, I see him say things on the Twitters and stuff, and I'm just like, my guy, you're just a hateful person. And all political philosophies and political movements have people like that they chant the slogans of the movement. And, I often think it's like, imagine you're in the Middle Ages, or the Dark Ages, I guess, and you're at church, and everybody is, praise God, Jesus will save us, repent your sins, and everybody's chanting the same thing, God is good. And then you get one guy in the back, burn the witches. There's always somebody like that. And people like Patton Oswalt, that's them. They're the people in the congregation while people are worshiping whatever, who are in the back agitating for the worst human behaviors. They're just awful. He's just and there's lots of them, like Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel's another one. He talks like this all the time. It's like, one, you're not funny. Like, you're not a funny person to start with. I don't find you particularly entertaining. You don't even write your own jokes. I mean, like, you're just reading. And he just says hateful stuff. And if the left, the political left in America, had a moral compass and a moral center, like a strong moral leadership, they would call these people out. And they would say, hey, that's not acceptable. That's not what we believe. But they don't. They lack a strong moral foundation. They lack a pillar. Movements without leaders are usually not strong movements. They're just mobs. The mob often lacks a leader. And the problem, and that's for me a big problem, because in a mob, the worst people rise to the top. I have a real problem with that. It's really funny too, because, a lot of my own personal beliefs and ethics and moral values, I would suggest that I'm very closely aligned with what a lot of those people say their moral or their philosophical opinions are. But I don't believe them. I don't believe them. Because you can't be a proponent of universal health care and then say that some people who get sick shouldn't get it because you don't like the choices they've made. You can't. You can't. Those are mutually exclusive things. You can't say that. Right? You can't say that you support rights for everybody and then champion taking the rights away from other people. You can't. You can't be a proponent of equality and actively make other people less equal to try and achieve what you think is equal. Because you don't, at that point, believe in equality. You believe in some bastardized, opinionated form of equality, or it's not even equal. It's redistribution at that point. And that's where the whole socialist thing comes in. I think the cries of people going, oh, socialism, it's just harpies. They're harpies. They're just people who talk shit. They don't know what they're talking about. But I do agree that there's a significant group of people who now believe that, or who think that their view of equality, whose view of equality requires taking something away from somebody else. That's not equality, that's redistribution. And so the moment you start talking about that, you lose people like me. Because I'm a high tide lifts all boats kind of guy. I'm a let's all get better. And if you have less than me today, then the way for you to get more isn't to take something from me. I don't buy into that kind of philosophy. I don't live in a world of scarcity like that. I think we live in a very abundant world. I think if you have less than me, then we need to make sure that you have every opportunity to get ahead. But it shouldn't come at my expense. Right? You should be given the opportunity and you should be able to take it in an equal fashion. But I shouldn't have to have a handicap to help you. Right? So there's imagine there's a great analogy. One of the, so handicapping, right? It's talk about handicaps in golf and stuff like that, but probably one of the best handicaps is there's a thing in Australia called the stall gift. And the stall gift is a foot race on grass. And they run heats and people get times. And then based on their times, they start slightly further behind the other competitors. And the idea being that you handicap them so that their start is equal. And then therefore the outcome is the outcome. I don't believe in that stuff. I think I don't believe in handicapping people. I don't think holding me back helps you get ahead. I think holding me back just holds me back. And if I can't compete with you, then you shouldn't have to be made to go slower. You shouldn't have less opportunity because I don't have as much as you. That just, you want to talk about things like fair taxation. I make a lot more money than most people. I should pay more tax. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's fair. I think I can afford to pay more. But there's a balance there. Right? There's a balance there. So a classic example of that balance being out of whack is in Australia. Between 2007 and 2020, so 13 years, people like myself, and I'm by no means wealthy, right? I do okay. I have a good job. I make reasonably good money. It puts me into the highest tax bracket in Australia, which isn't that exclusive of a club, let's be honest. And, but between 2007 and 2020, the percentage of what I earned that went to taxes increased considerably. And so adjusting for inflation and everything else, people like me between 2007 and 2020 actually made less money through no fault of our own, effectively through bracket creep and inflation. We just made less money. Because if you make over the top threshold, the top tax bracket threshold, then every additional dollar you make, it's taxed at the highest marginal tax rate. So if you think about it, right, the number's it's $180,000 a year, right? So if you make over $180,000 a year Australian, then every dollar you make after that, the government takes 45%. They actually take about 47.5% when you factor in Medicare and, all these other surcharges and that stuff. And then there was also one year where there was a few years where we were paying a debt levy because of the stupid money that Kevin Rudd spent. And so what happens is that if inflation is 2.5% and your salary goes up at the rate of inflation, which is kind of normal, right? If that means your costs are going up 2.5% too. So your rent, your petrol, your milk, your clothes, your utilities, all that stuff, it's all going up at 2.5%. Problem is that when you're in that top marginal tax bracket, basically half of that annual pay increase you get, which is effectively tied to inflation, half of that's gone before you even see it in tax. So adjusted for inflation, people in the highest marginal tax bracket from 2007 to 2020, every year, their real income went down by about 1%. So compound that over 13 years, you're looking at close to a 20% drop in disposable income and an increase of about 20% of the percentage that you pay in tax of your real world adjusted for inflation income. So, and it's the only group. So every other group of people below the highest marginal tax bracket, every other group of people in the country, including business, by the way, pay less tax than they did in 2007. So when I say the fact that I pay more and I'm okay with that, I'm okay with being on the highest marginal tax rate, and therefore somebody who makes less than me pays a lower portion. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's sensible. But at some point it starts to take the piss, right? Because when the federal government last year, well, a few years ago, they introduced legislation that would see a flattening of the tax system, and it would have seen a significant reduction in the highest marginal tax rate. And it would have created less tiers, which it's actually a good idea. It's technically it's a good idea. It simplifies the tax system. Everybody wins. It just creates this shitty situation among people on the left who want to eat the rich until they're rich, and they don't know what rich is. So that's the problem. But it's an optics issue, not a reality issue. And so last year, the federal government brought in tax cuts, and some of it went to people like me. And I'm due for another tax cut, like a big one, next year or the year after. But if you actually work it out, all it does is it puts me at the same percentage of tax that I was paying as a portion of my income as 2007. So all the federal government is doing is just getting rid of bracket creep. All they're doing is cutting my taxes to a proportion where you've adjusted it for inflation. If the government passed legislation tomorrow that said tax brackets will be adjusted by inflationary rates every second year, this problem wouldn't exist. But governments know that bracket creep is good for them, particularly in the high end, right? They don't have to raise taxes. They just have to get inflation to do the work for them. And they raise taxes indirectly. And so over the last, and if you are smart and you understand numbers, you can see that the portion of income or the portion of federal tax income that's come from the highest marginal tax earners of Australia has exploded since 2007. And every other group has dropped. So the pie is increasingly being produced by a very small group of people. And you might argue, oh, well, that's fair because they make the most money, but it's not actually true. Most of the people are living in expensive cities. As always, the people who get rich on this shit are always boomers, right? Because they're the largest property holders, and most of high income working people actually don't have a high income because they're trapped in deep in debt to banks to pay for property to buy it off boomers at overpriced numbers, and so the whole system is continuously geared so that boomers profit. And I don't like I'm not somebody who's kicking boomers because I don't really care much, but the whole system is geared for them to profit off everything, right? I've joked about this in the past, but if you look at millennials and you look at boomers, right, you assume that the boomers are kind of the millennials' grandparents, right? It's how demographically it sort of works. The boomers told us in the 60s and the 70s they were going to change the world, that it was going to be a better place for you and me. That was their mantra. They were changing the world, bro. And what did they do? They spent the 80s raping the planet, right? Creating the climate crisis that everybody's freaked out about. And by the time they got to the position of economic power in the 80s, right? Just pure demographics. The mantra of greed is good came. What did we get for it? We got the decimation of middle-class jobs. Everything went overseas. And the boomers' retirement funds have just gone through the roof. They're the wealthiest generation the world's ever seen. And every generation that's come after them has less wealth. And will have less wealth. And Zach's generation, whatever you want to call them, they will be the first generation who actually make less money than their parents. So the boomers basically just consumed and frittered away trillions and trillions of dollars. And the whole system has been structured for their prosperity. Right? If you were a moral philosopher, you would say that their parents and grandparents fought 2 world wars and built a society so that their children, the boomers, and their grandchildren, the boomers, could prosper. And prosper they have. But they're like parasites. They're locusts. They've left very little for anyone else. And then you look at the millennials, and it's very similar. You see many, many, many same characteristics. They're going to change the world. In the 60s and that, the boomers, it was nuclear weapons. The world was going to end, quite literally. You can go back, you could see that the world's going to end tomorrow. They had this is where the doomsday clock comes from, right? And now you look at the millennials. The world's going to end in 12 years. They tell you confidently. The climate emergency, it's just nuclear war. It's just exactly the same, just a different name. And they're going to change the world. They're going to fix everything. They don't believe in borders, man. Just like their grandparents didn't believe in it. And then now you start to see the trends. And now you start to say, that's interesting. It's a bit late to be eating McDonald's, isn't it? But you see the trends, right? Look at their leaders. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a great example, right? She was a waitress who decided to run for public office. Good for her. I think that's, you can go back. I actually have Facebook posts and shit. from 2000 and when did she get elected? 2007, 2018. There are posts from 2017, 2018 where I'd first heard of her when she was walking around the Bronx, knocking on doors in tennis shoes, trying to unseat a sitting Democrat. There, you can see, I'm like, this is how democracy should. Yeah, I'm private on Facebook. There's, this is how democracy should work. This is what representative democracy actually should be. These people decide they want to make their local area better, and they run and they beat the incumbent and they take their seat and they fight for their locals. She won. And before she even was sworn in, she was complaining that they weren't paying her to move to Washington. Oh, I can't afford to pay for a flat in Washington and New York. She hadn't even taken her job yet. She's like one of those people who they get a phone call. Okay, you've won, or you've applied for a job and you've won, and we want you to start on a week Monday. Oh, well, I can't afford to buy my clothes to come to work. You have to give me money. That was what she did. She complained that she didn't have enough money to go to Washington. And then she gets there, and immediately she's embroiled in campaign finance issues. Her campaign is paying her boyfriend thousands of dollars to make her websites. So I think her campaign paid him $7,500 to make a WordPress site. Like, fuck, man, I could knock that out in an afternoon. Just cool. And then, a mere 2.5 years later, she lives in one of the most exclusive areas of Washington, D.C., pays $4,000 a month in rent, and has a Tesla. Never goes to her constituency in New York. Never even visits. For a year and a half, she was in office. Didn't even have an office in her constituency, which she has a legal obligation to do. She didn't have a constituency office. So this person who was complaining about having student loans and being poor and representing the little guy, in under 2 years or 2.5 years, now has a luxury apartment in Washington, D.C., upscale accommodation in New York City, and drives a Tesla. And she makes $175,000 a year. So the millennials are starting to sound an awful lot like their grandparents. And it goes deeper. So you've got, what's his name? Hassan Piker, Hassanabi over on Twitch. Got very strong left-wing political views. Did he buy himself like a $3 million condo or something? Like, awesome, man. You've gotten a bag. Good for you. But please don't sit there and tell me, about your socialist credibility, right? You're making a fat bag, and you're buying multi-million-dollar properties. Yeah, no, I'm not interested in you, socialist. On Valkyrie is another one, right? Sat there and during the presidential election, yeah, she's a nice lady. She seems nice, very popular. She's earned her money. She's done well. Good for her. But, strong Democrat. Believes the state of California should give refugees free health care, free education, free this, free that. Now she wants to move to Las Vegas. Why? No state tax. So she wants the state of California to pay for all this stuff. And now because she earned a fat bag, she pays a lot of tax. She's going to move to a state with no tax. Right? It's not, doesn't, and in her credit, I actually, I think it's important to be fair. She acknowledges the hypocrisy of it. She says, "Oh, but openly she says I pay too much tax. I can go there and pay less." Then maybe if your taxes are too high, part of the reason your taxes are so high is because you're giving away a whole bunch of services. And I'm somebody who supports universal health care. Doesn't matter if you're a refugee. I'm all about making sure people get sick, get healed, right? If you're promoting the government spend tax dollars on services, you have a fucking obligation to pay the tax. Like, I'm sorry. That's just the reality of the situation. Don't promulgate a position. Don't promote a position. And then when it comes to fruition, complain about what it costs you. Right? Nico Lol, right? 100 Thieves, another 100 Thieves person. She's the OK Boomer girl with her Bernie t-shirt doing her TikTok dance. Made millions. Lives in Texas, pays no state tax, has a multi-million-dollar unit. Multi-million-dollar condo. Fucking socialists, man. Holy shit. Socialism sounds pretty lucrative. How do I get me some of that? Right? That's the people who give socialism a bad name, right? Because I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of having a society that focuses on making sure that the lowest among us are well cared for. Like, I don't have a problem with that, right? Like, I've said it multiple times. I don't mind paying a lot of tax to get free health care so that if my neighbor's daughter gets sick, they don't have to worry about what it costs. She can just get healthy again. And, I'm probably one of the strongest people for vaccinations you'll ever run across. But if somebody chooses not to get a vaccine and they get sick, please make them better and send them home to their family. Right? That's I'm not Jimmy Kimmel. I'm not fucking Howard Stern, and I'm not, Patton Oswalt. I don't believe in punishing people with healthcare or withholding healthcare as a punishment for having opinions I don't agree with. I think that's stupid. And I think they're stupid, mean-spirited, evil people. But I also don't agree with wealthy people espousing political philosophy and then running away and not paying for it. It's what's that guy's name? Mike Cannon Brooks here in Australia. So he's the dude who's the founder. He's one of the founders of Atlassian, and he's worth billions now, right? And he is actively promoting the Australian government to basically shut down the coal industry in Australia, right? Well, yeah, equality. They don't want equality. They want to feel good about it. They want other people to get stuff. They just don't want to be the ones to pay for it. Is what we're talking about there. But Mike Cannon Brooks is actively promoting the idea that the government should basically shut down the coal industry. Thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs, billions of dollars in royalties to state governments. And his answer for that is renewables. And he wants to build a solar farm and export energy to Singapore via an undersea cable. Now, dude is basically talking about exporting sunshine at the end of the day, right? And he clearly doesn't understand things like attenuation or anything else, but never mind that. What he is doing is he's a grifter, right? He is a grifter. What he wants, right, is if you take the energy sector, coal is actually pretty cheap and it's pretty efficient in terms of its ability to produce energy. It has all kinds of implications on the environment and stuff, and we can have that debate separately. But let's just say what it is. It's a cheap energy source, right? Just bottom line. Solar is actually expensive because the infrastructure required not just to collect the solar energy, but to distribute it is actually very expensive. And these people never talk about the distribution of energy because they don't care to talk about it, because that's the expensive part. Building the substations in the network to actually move the energy around is actually really expensive. That's where most of the money goes. So what he wants is he wants to get subsidies from the government to invest in solar energy, right? So he wants the government to subsidize him, a business that he wants to start that's uneconomical, right? So he wants a government subsidy to do that. Then he wants the government to regulate and shut down a competitor to him. Okay? So he wants to increase the cost to his competitor and ultimately regulate them out of the market. So now he is the only provider of energy. And he provides it in an uneconomical way that requires subsidies. So what happens in a world where the government follows his ideas? We have no coal. He can't produce enough energy. So the government then has to give him more money, or we, don't have refrigeration because we don't have enough energy. Right? So then he has to get more subsidies. And he just makes profit. And it's basically the government's just giving him money. He's a billionaire. If this is such a good idea, invest your own money. And do it, and if it's such a good idea, compete with the coal industry on its merits. Go to the public and say, hey, yes, solar is more expensive. The electricity that I provide is more expensive, but it's better. See what happens. See what the market says. Right? So this guy is, and there's other ones, what's his name? Holmes Accord. What's his name? Not Robert. He had, is it Peter? One of them. Simon Holmes Accord. So his grandfather, his grandfather was a billionaire. Or his father. Yeah, his father. And I met his mother, Janet. I met her a few times. Anyway, his father got rich by effectively, it's hard to describe, but he was a lawyer who created contracts for himself in the West Australian government and found loopholes in the way that the government procurement was done. And he then created a company for himself while working for the government and then exploited these loopholes and got rich that way. It was really shady, but never illegal, but not great. And then they got into all kinds of, the Holmes Accord family got into all kinds of stuff. And so he's inherited this money, and he is like Mike Cannon Brooks. They're kind of this team, and they're investing in renewables. But they're not really investing. What they're doing is they're lobbying for the government to invest into them so they can invest, and then they'll create this industry that's not sustainable and not economically viable, and then the government will have to consistently bail it out with subsidies, and our energy prices will go up. So we'll be less efficient, our manufacturing sector will take another shitter. These people are idiots, but they're grifters. And so whenever rich people look for government handouts, I get really worried. Like I saw one the other day where Amazon are offering scholarships to all of their staff. All of their factory staff can now get a scholarship. And it's basically limited at, I think it's $5,200 US a year, which subsequently is the tax deductible they're allowed. So effectively Amazon will pay for their factory worker to the tune of $5,200 a year to go to university or college, effectively community college, and then they just won't pay tax on that. Okay. Now, that sounds great. If you're an idiot, that sounds great. But it's effectively just a giant handout to Amazon. What do you mean? Well, not the fact that it's a tax deductible, because that doesn't really matter, right? Who cares? No, because somebody's getting educated out of it. Like, so if Amazon wants to pay for somebody to get a college degree, great. I don't care if the government, I like free education, so government pay for it anyway, so who cares? But that's not what's going to happen here, right? So you can mark my words on this, right? You could take notes, whatever you want. What's going to happen is this college program that Amazon's going to create. They're now reaching out to schools to see who wants to participate, right? I didn't get a free education either. I had to pay for my own. So Amazon are reaching out to colleges and things to see who wants to participate. Okay. Now, here's what's going to happen. 100% of the colleges that get accepted into this program, where Amazon will make their degrees available to their staff, 100% of those institutions will be online. 100% of them. And 100% of them will be Amazon AWS customers. 100% of them will be. So what do you have here? Well, what you have here is Amazon will let these schools, they will give these schools money, and then those schools will give a whole bunch of that money back to Amazon through AWS. So Amazon will probably cream, right, about 20% of that money back through AWS. Maybe not 20%, but there will be a significant portion that will come back through AWS. So effectively, this is just a government handout to Amazon when you get down to it. Maybe some people get college degrees, maybe they won't. The government could actually just pay for it themselves. The government could say, you know what? If you work for Amazon, we'll give you $5,200 education voucher. You can spend it at any college you want. And then Amazon will get nothing. Right? Doesn't cost. Amazon doesn't spend the money and the government spends the money, but it doesn't matter. It's all the government's money anyway, because Amazon aren't going to pay tax on that and all that stuff, right? So it doesn't matter. Government, it's a tax deductible, right? So, but Amazon wouldn't get the kickback through AWS because you can guarantee, like I said, just mark my words, when this all shakes out and we see the list of schools where people will be able to get their degrees from, every single one of those schools will be an AWS customer. Every single one. So a significant portion of that money will come back to Amazon. And it'll come back to Amazon in a higher value portion of their business where they retain more profit than any other part of their business. AWS. So Amazon's retail business is garbage, right? It's a steaming pile of garbage. It's very low margin, very high risk, really hard to run. Their AWS business is basically just shits out gold bars. It's push the button, machine goes brrr, and then it turns out gold. It is magic, that business. What's the name? Andy Jassy and Werner Vogels, the guys who created that business. Jeff Bezos owes those dudes everything. Because Jeff Bezos would have went broke. Amazon would have went bankrupt without AWS. 10 years ago, Amazon would have been out of business. AWS kept them afloat. But that's what's going to happen, is these education programs will just kick back to Amazon. it's so I don't know if you call it corruption or whatever you want to call it, but it's just so dirty. I don't care. Like, it doesn't cost me anything. And a whole bunch of people will get degrees out of it, so good for them, I guess. But then they'll just be overeducated factory workers. And it'd be interesting to see if Amazon tie it back to employment, right? So a lot of companies, what they do is they'll give you free training, but then they require you to work for them for X amount of time afterward. Otherwise, you have to pay it back. I don't think Amazon will be able to do that because they're going to claim the tax deductible. But there'll be another sting in the tail. There'll be something else. Amazon aren't doing this because they're good people. Companies like Walmart and that are doing it because they need to attract people. Walmart and companies like that in the US have a real problem right now that they just can't get staff. The U.S. is in for a huge shock. Their economy in the United States is in for a huge shock. When governments stop stroking checks for people to not work, because that day's coming, these people are going to have to go back to work. And who knows what happens. I'm curious about the real inflation number in the U.S. right now. I actually think it sounds awful. I don't mean it. I think Delta actually helps that, because inflation was out of control in the U.S. because the economy was going rapid. The government was just tipping money into the economy, trillions, and it was creating inflation. But now it's going to slow down. So Delta will kick in, and that might rebalance everything, because governments will have to stop paying people to not work, and then people will, not be able to do as much. And excuse me, yeah, it's a strange thing. So you're still not working? I mean, I say that, but I assume you're still not allowed to go back to work, right? I actually just need some time off work. I'm kind of at the point now where I'm mentally exhausted, but I'm just about to enter into something else. $750. Haven't we had this discussion? You don't pay rent, so I don't know, man. What are you doing with your $750 a week if you don't pay rent and you don't pay for food? Seems okay to me. Oh, you're talking about other people. Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't mean me. I mean other people. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm less. I think Christmas is going to be ridiculous in New South Wales. Yeah, I've posted about it on my Facebook to friends and stuff. I said, if you live in Sydney or New South Wales more broadly, if I were you, I would start doing my Christmas shopping very, very early. I would because inventory levels are very low. Companies are still having trouble getting things into the country. Logistics are still a bit of a nightmare. The fact there's no planes flying means that there's a lot of cargo just not getting here. Because people have been in lockdown, savings are way up, so people are cashed up. And the moment the shopping centers open up and people are allowed to go outside, man, it's going to be bedlam in the shopping centers. And people are cashed up. This Christmas is going to be nuts. So if there's anything you want or you want to buy somebody for Christmas, I highly suggest you buy it early. Otherwise, you're not going to get it, right? Like one of my friends is a buyer for a large online e-tailer here in Australia who sell computer parts, and he basically says their forward projections for things like graphics cards and shit like that. He's just like, we basically think we're going to be sold out before Black Friday. He said Black Friday will come. We won't be able to have sales of big ticket items because we won't have any, right? He said, we're just not going to have stock. So they're anticipating an absolute shit Black Friday. He just says we're just not going to have anything because it'll all be gone already. And they can't get their stock fast enough. It was interesting as well. He and I were talking about graphics cards the other day. And he said they have sold 20% more graphics cards this year than last year. It's the most graphics cards, particularly NVIDIA. It's the most NVIDIA graphics cards they've ever sold in a year. Prices are off the charts, and inventory levels are not great. They're low. And he just said it's crazy. But interestingly, the retailers don't make a lot of money. They make more now, but their margin is not changed. So if you say like a 3080 graphics card, they still make the same margin on that card. Even if it was being sold at MSRP, they would still make the same margin. But what's happening is their wholesaler is charging them more. So they're then just charging the same markup, the same margin, and passing it on. So they technically make more money because their margin hasn't changed, but they're not making higher margins. The wholesalers and the companies, the AIBs who make the cards, they're cleaning up. Because NVIDIA sell them the chips at a price that's designed more or less to be close to MSRP. And they get those chips and then sell them on at astronomically inflated prices that the market will bear. And then the retailers have to add, but the retailers haven't increased their margins. They've just increased the amount of profit they've made because their margin yields better results. But the wholesalers are absolutely raking it in. Sinex and people like that in Australia are just raking the money in. And dirty pool, right? Very dirty tactics. So like, if you want to buy 50 graphics cards, you have to buy 50 of these shitty motherboards that we can't sell because they're trash. Otherwise, we won't sell you the graphics cards. So they're creating these bundle deals. And so the retailers then have to do two things. They have to factor in the price of these shitty motherboards they're going to lose money on into the price of the graphics card so that they don't lose money. So these bundle deals are causing huge problems. Huge problems. But the one thing in Australia we haven't really suffered with that they've suffered with in other parts of the world is that our wholesalers haven't been selling directly to miners. So that's why in Australia we have reasonably good supply of the cards all the time. They're just high price because there's not like a pallet of graphics cards ends up in the hands of a miner. That doesn't happen here. Partly because our electricity costs are too high. That's actually part of the reason for that. But also Sinex and the other companies who sell to the retail chains, the retail outlets, they're not selling to miners, which is good, because if that was the case, we'd be in lots of trouble. But Sinex are just making a killing, and companies like them. What should happen is companies like M-Wave should stop. They should try and deal direct. They're big enough. They should try and deal direct with the AIBs and cut out Sinex and others. But it's a pretty risky play, because the volumes they have to buy would be significant. So effectively then somebody like M-Wave would have to then become a distributor, like a wholesaler, as well as a retailer. And that's dicey, because nobody wants to deal with their competitors. Nobody wants to have to buy wholesale from their retail competitor, because that's a bit of an ugly situation. So the computer market's just a mess. It's just financially, it's just a gong show right now. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. But I think NVIDIA, from what I heard, cut production in August on some of the 3060s because they were making too many. And they thought AMD was going to come out with a very competitive lower end card and didn't. So now they're just cutting the production of the 3060s so they can raise the price. It's just awful. The best thing that could happen to the PC gaming enthusiast market would be for Intel to release their graphics cards, and they'd be bloody awesome. If Intel's graphics cards come out and are unbelievable value at the low end, that would be the best thing that would ever happen, because it would force AMD and it would force NVIDIA to compete down there. And the only way to compete down there is to pull your better cards down. Because if Intel come out with a competitor at the, if you take the 3060, right? The 3060 is a mid-tier card. And then there's nothing below that. And AMD have nothing down there. Like the 6600 is a 3060 competitor, right? And so they have nothing down there. There's nothing in the sub $400 market. There's nothing down there. So if Intel come out with a card that is 95% as performant as a 3060 or a 6600, they come in at like close that level of performance and sell it at $200 or $250. They'll destroy AMD and NVIDIA down there, because you could say what you want. AMD has the problem in the graphics card market that nobody trusts their brand. Everybody trusts NVIDIA, but everybody trusts Intel, right? They don't have that same problem. And at the $250 US mark, they're not competing with enthusiasts. They're going for low-end Fortnite machines, and people will buy those all day. And so what has to happen is NVIDIA has to drop a 3050 card, which is of questionable merit. So the 3050 will come in. Where will it compare to the 3060? Right? Where does it fit in that lineup? And if the 3060 is whatever, 450 US or whatever, and they come in at 250 with a 3050, well, if Intel comes in at 90% of the performance of a 3060, you can't sell a 3050 at 90% of the performance of a 3060 for 60% of the price. You just can't. So Intel has a way of disrupting that market. And it's to charge low prices for almost as good enough performance. And it will just, the only thing that AMD will be able to, or NVIDIA in particular will be able to do, is just drop the 3060. They'll just have to drop it down to the 250, 300, they'll probably say 300 US. And then that pulls that down. And then you stand back and say, okay, well, what does that do to the 3060 Ti? That can't be a $500 card at that point. So then it has to drop. And then it's like, well, if the 3060 Ti is now $400, why would I pay $800 for a 3070? And so it'll just pull everything down. Or not. Or NVIDIA might just say, well, you know what? We'll take our chances. That's a risky play, right? They could just say, okay, we'll cede the low end, we'll give it up, and we'll maintain the high end. There's whole books, there's entire books written about why that's a terrible strategy. There's whole books written on that one. Go read Clay Christensen, right? Dude, he writes books on disruption, right? Where is it? The Innovator's Dilemma. I read that in 1999, I think. Yeah, he published it in 1997. I read it in 1999. I was living in Hong Kong. And the Innovators, no, not Hayden Christensen. Clay Christensen. I think Clay Christensen died, actually. Did he die? Yeah, he died last year. Yeah, that's right. I met him. He did a lecture I was at in Hong Kong in 1999 on innovation. And he talked about his book, The Innovator's Dilemma. And I read his book, and it's incredible. It tells you. So if you want to see how you disrupt a market, that's the book to read. So he gives all kinds of examples, right? And that's the risk that NVIDIA run, and to a lesser extent AMD run. That is, if Intel come in and can provide good enough performance comparable to the low end, if comparable to the low end of what NVIDIA and AMD make, but at a significantly reduced price, if Intel can come in and compete at that, then it's easy for them to scale up. It's much, much harder for NVIDIA and AMD to scale down in price because it's hard to justify that, right? These are companies that are measured on margin. So if you're selling a 3060 card today for $500 US, it's very hard to sell it tomorrow for 300. It's very difficult. And it's not difficult with respect to doing it. It's very difficult to explain to your shareholders how your gross profit margin just fell through the floor. And so and so then Intel can just slowly eke away at market share, slowly eke away at the product line. And then eventually, in 1 or 2 generations, Intel are competing at, 80% of the performance of the top end cards at 50% of the price. You're not going to, if Intel can sell an ARC 3 card for $600 US or $700 US, that is 80% of the performance of a 3080 that's selling for double that price. nobody's buying the 3080. Like nobody. You'll get the enthusiasts, single digit percentages of the market. Single digit percentages of the market. Most people will buy good enough. And then NVIDIA's in real trouble because then they lack the money to compete in that market going forward. This has been done over and over again. Clay Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, it's well worth a read if you want to see how these markets can shift. And the biggest casualty would be AMD because they just can't produce enough. They just seemingly can't produce enough RDNA 2 cards. And I know why. Because the RDNA 2 graphics cards, they don't sell enough that it's worth them taking their silicon wafers away from the Ryzens. It's just it's more profitable to make on the 7 nanometer wafers. It's just more profitable to make Ryzen chips than it is to make RDNA 2 chips. It's that simple. So they have a different problem. I think Intel or AMD had an opportunity with the 6000 series cards and going against this generation of NVIDIA. I think AMD had a real opportunity. I think they blew it. Clay Christensen, you should read The Innovator's Dilemma. That's the book you want. He's got an updated version of it, but the one from 1997 or whatever is probably still the best one. Where? I don't know what's going on here. Weird. So yeah. Yeah, it's from 1997. It's an economics book, so the philosophies never change. Yeah, he did teach at Harvard. I was working for a company in Hong Kong, and they paid him, I believe they paid him $50,000 to do a 1 hour talk for some of us. It's a good gig. He's very smart. He was a very smart man. Very, very pleasant person as well. He was an intellectual. Is a good way to describe him. But it's a good book. Anyway, we're at 11:30. We've been doing this for 3.5 hours. My throat's getting a bit sore. I think it's time we pulled the pin and called it a night. I'm pretty annoyed with this YouTube creator studio. Hopefully they fix it up. Thanks, man. It was fun. I enjoyed it as well. We'll be back tomorrow night. We'll be doing some gaming. Oh, thank you for turning up and being engaged. We'll be back tomorrow. Play some video games. Hopefully find some new content that I can make a TikTok video on, because my shorts video did really well, actually. My TikTok was okay. Like, what did I end up? Sorry, let me just check that. How did my TikTok video go? No. View my profile. Yeah, it did okay. The TikTok did okay, but you know what? The shorts video, where is that? Yeah, the shorts video is banging. The YouTube shorts video did 4 times the traffic as the TikTok video. That tells you something. Whoops. That's pretty crazy. So we need to do more of that, because that was good value. Anyway, man, I'll catch you guys later. Not everyone has TikTok. Yeah, no. Maybe. I don't know. I just think I just do. I didn't have TikTok till yesterday either. I think I can't use it. I open it up and I shake my head. But anyway, I'm gonna go. I'll see you tomorrow. Have fun. Take care. Peace.